There we go. We are live. Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Marley Leacock, the astronomer here at the HR MacMillan Space Centre, hosting without Michael. He is actually out in Berlin right now at a really cool conference that I'm jealous he's at. The Planetarium Conference happens once every 2 years, so he's seeing a lot of really cool stuff. But he did not leave me alone. He found a really awesome guest. I'm happy to introduce you to Jason Reimuller, who is the executive director of two really cool organizations that we get to talk about today. One being the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences, and the other being a really great project and nonprofit called Out Astronaut. So, hello, Jason. How are you today?
Marley, thanks for having me. Good to see you here.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm just really glad Michael was able to find the nonprofit. I think that's how he found you first. And then also learning more about you and the organizations that you have. You mentioned before we went live that there are actually three different initiatives that you're part of and that uh, your institute is looking at and working towards. And so I'm really excited to hear about all of them. And I'm sure our viewers are as well. So thank you very much for joining us. And I'm sure we're all excited to hear your presentation. As always, people who are here watching live on YouTube, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I can ask them to Jason as they come up. But I think I will turn it over to you, Jason, to introduce us all to the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Marley. And this is so timely because I see you're located out in British Columbia, and we do so much of our work up in Canada. We're a very multinational organization, but we've done work in so many provinces from high-level Alberta to Baffin Island and Nunavut to Canadian Space Agency in Montreal to Ottawa with the National Research Council of Canada, and even out to with the Canadian Air Force out in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So gotten a chance to know a lot of Canada, and it's great to see the work that you do out in BC.
Oh,
So
thank you so much. I do always say Canada, we like to be really shy about our contributions to space and the space effort. We don't brag about it very much, but we do a lot in the space environment. And so I'm glad you've been able to participate and also see some of it.
absolutely, and Canada is one of the world leaders in things like space life sciences and robotics, and and remote sensing too.
Oh yeah,
And
robotics remote sense. MDA right down the street, actually, right down, I guess,
exactly.
outside of Vancouver, out in Richmond, right? Like we are here. We're very present. Canada is around in the space environment.
And I know you do a lot of work in astronomy, but I'd like to talk a little bit about aeronomy, like upper atmosphere science, and I like always say, in Canada, it's the high access to high latitude. Everything interesting in aeronomy happens at high latitudes. That's where most of the magnetosphere interacts, and you get to see things like noctilucent clouds, which are indicators of climate change, amongst other things. A lot going on there too.
Oh, I didn't even really consider that part of things. Like we at the Space Center, we do focus a lot on the astronomy and the space aspect, but there is more to the entire field than just the stars and what we can observe to them. Like you're like the upper atmosphere science in regards to climate monitoring and climate change monitoring as well. Canada, starting to get more involved in, particularly I know with wildfire research as well.
Fantastic. Um,
All right. I know you had some
well,
slides prepared for us today. If you want to take it away and
sure. Let me change over here to share my screen. Oops. Okay, am I coming through okay?
you are. I can see it perfectly. So this is good. I'm excited.
So I'd love to share with your listeners and our viewers here just kind of very quickly what we do and why we do it. We're a nonprofit organization organized in the state of Colorado in the United States, but we have members from over 60 different countries. And like I said, we do a lot in Canada. We do some here in the U.S. And we're trying to alter the way people see the future. Astronauts have had this very powerful role in society. The societies that have it. I look at my sources of my privilege in life and growing up with a career aviator and being inspired by the Apollo astronauts. I learned from a very young age, an appreciation for science and the value of an education. And it kind of seeded this scientific inquiry that served me through life. And I just realized later in life what a great privilege that's been. And here we have this incredible opportunity with the addition of commercialized space flight to access other create other means for more people to be involved in research institutes in other countries, and more of a truly international scene. But the other hand, there's this threat that it's going to be seen as an elitist pursuit, that it's a joyride for billionaire. So we're really trying to make sure that the traditional ways that space and spaceflight have inspired people um, ma maintain themselves, and that people have agency in this future and can help co-create this future. So fundamentally, what we do at IAS, again, we're a nonprofit, and we want to make sure that people have the access to become professionals in the industry, no matter where they come in the world. They don't have to grow up in, the U.S. or Canada or even Russia or ESA to be a part of this. And we're finding that people from countries that haven't been represented are finding avenues to get involved and to be professionals, because the professionals, they can demand a seat at the table, so they don't have to ask permission, and by doing so they help form what we see in space, and the return to Earth of what we do in space. So that's fundamentally what we do. We talk about one of our senior advisors is Winston Scott, who's a NASA astronaut, actually grew up in a segregated school, and he played he studied jazz, and that was his perception of what successful people did. But he had a love for STEM, and ended up always taking STEM courses on the side of his music studies, and it opened doors for to be a pilot, to be a test pilot, then to be an astronaut, and thinking of what astronauts really do to society, that fund them and that train them in their missions, and they inspire. They can talk on almost any topic of STEM, so they become an ambassador to STEM, this very human face on the research. They succeed by the value of their merit. It's a lifetime of preparation to be the kind of person that a nation would entrust its most daring initiatives to. And they're really seen as international ambassadors, the global perspective and the sense of service, the risk that they take because they believe so much in the mission and what it means for ultimately humanity. So these are what we want to preserve. And in order to preserve that, we need to reduce the barriers that might exist. And those barriers can be physical barriers. How do you provide access, physical access, but equally important is economic access. How do you do it at a cost point that a diversity of people can participate in, to have agency in how this future is going to look like. So, we have over 60 different countries represented. We've flown 5 astronauts. Actually, one just got selected, so I think we're going to have 6 here really soon.
Oh, wow.
We're the first
Congratulations.
agency. Thank you. We're the first private organization to launch a complete research space flight, to commit a research space flight, and that happened last November. Kelly Girardi. And then we followed up with the second one, including Canadian, Dr. Shauna Pandya, and the first Irish astronaut, Dr. Nora Pandya. Coincidentally, an all-female flight too.
Yeah.
So, that's the way, we're seeing what the future looks like. It's going to be a lot more diverse. We have 3 outreach programs. You mentioned Out Astronaut, very
Yes.
personal to me. And you look at a community that is by many studies about 50% underrepresented in STEM, and
Hmm.
you don't think it's a coincidence that there are a lack of highly visible STEM professionals, notably astronauts. So there's been systems that have long been needed to be dismantled, and that's fundamentally what we try to do with Out Astronaut. We have a program called Possum 13. Possum's a nod to our aeronomy program, and 13's a nod to the Mercury 13, tracing back to the Mercury 7 days. And we try to get more positive imagery for women that are excelling in STEM. And then we have Space for All Nations, and we have a pilot project now in Guatemala, their first steps into space, how to use this to be as broadly socially impactful in terms of native research that trace to national interests and STEM education opportunities. So our core values, science, stewardship, inclusion, everything we do traces back to that. We focus in aeronomy, upper atmosphere science, microgravity sciences. We represent, outside of Canada, we represent the National Research Council of Canada, the Flight Research Lab, arguably the best microgravity in the hemisphere. They have a wonderful aircraft to do that. And so we bring a lot of people to Ottawa for that. We do a lot of bioastronautics research there too, a lot with spacesuits. We've tested and validated both IVA and EVA prototype spacesuits. IVA
Oh,
is like
wow.
inside the spacecraft, and EVA is when you intentionally go outside of a vehicle to fix a space station or to walk on the moon or something like that.
Yeah, those big
Um,
bulky suits, right? The ones that all the kids are familiar with. Most people anyway, the big bulky ones that they wear like outside of the ISS on spacewalks, for example, right? Like those are those
yeah, it's a
EVA suits.
it's a one-person spaceship,
Yeah,
where an
exactly. That's a
IVA
good way.
spacesuit is
Yeah.
designed if something goes wrong. You shouldn't need
Right.
it. But ever since in the Soviet Union in 1973, they had a depressurization that was the last loss of crew of the Soviet program. And ever since then, every Soviet flight and every US flight, everyone that's flown in spaces has pardon the pun, followed suit. And so, yeah, that's been a very key part of what we've done with bioastronautics, or the human in space aspects. Flight test engineering, ways you can study this art, regardless of the culture of mixing science and engineering and operations. You don't have to be a test pilot to get the value in this. Anyone in an operations field could gain a lot from that, or pilots that want a more intimate understanding of what they do. Um, so yeah, at the top there, that's in Canada. I had a chance to fly backseat with the Canadian Air Force, and one of our students, well, actually became one of my instructors. He was a flight instructor, and we chased some noctilucent clouds from Edmonton. And I have to say, one of the best nights was taking off actually on Canada Day over Edmonton in that aircraft right there, looking at the fireworks, and then going to chase these space clouds up
Oh,
north of
wow.
Edmonton. Um, so yeah, and below we've used some planes up in high level Alberta, a good latitude to study these particular kind of clouds. And you can see the plane, a little more modest plane we used. It was a Turbo Mooney in the lower left, and then we also looked at these clouds from balloons and made some instruments for a NASA mission.
Oh,
That's
wow.
on the lower right. So these are some of the images that we've gotten from there. The upper atmosphere, it's so exciting because and a lot of your listeners are into astronomy, and so to say, like, the mesosphere is really where it's at right now, and it's longly been ignored, but it's the
Yes.
most sensitive part of our planet, the most dynamic. It's where all the solar energy is interacting with the terrestrial energy being convected up by gravity waves, and we think that what we're observing there is directly tied to the atmosphere as a whole, and the changes that we see up there are tied to the changes that we're introducing through the human cause changes of global climate. So very timely and interesting field to be in. And again, in Canada's fantastic place to look at. We've based a couple times out of high level Alberta up by the Northwest Territory border. And that's actually where I did my dissertation research from the University of Colorado. Maybe a little bit of video. I think the video might come through for your viewers.
Oh, I can see it pretty okay. Yeah.
In the interest of time, I'm going to skip some of the videos here, but here's an Ottawa. We're testing a spacesuit. This is Kelly Girardi. She's our first institutional astronaut, and doing the training of this. It's kind of the way our flight crews work together to do all sorts of different kinds of research. And here we're going into microgravity, and Joey Corsa.
Oh.
He's working with Jared Isaacman now on the Polaris Dawn mission. He's giving Kelly a little artificial gravity, and Keith over there is monitoring all of her biometrics,
Hmm.
everything from skin temperatures and CO2, everything in the spacesuit, and making sure that she's okay every parabola that we go in and out of. So, very trying to make these tests as quantitative as possible. A typical course there with the NRC Falcon 20 and the diversity of our crews. Little nod from Justin Trudeau. I think your viewers may know of that gentleman. Um,
Maybe might have heard of him. Yeah.
And just some of our students there, piggybacking so much research we can do on that aircraft. Here's one of our flight test engineers, Heidi Hammerstein. She's not only testing the spacesuit and her dexterity in the suit, but looking at another experiment, in this case, the nodes of nutation of different objects as they're released into microgravity um,
Oh, okay.
as well. A lot of IVA spacesuit testing is what can go wrong, and a lot of what can go wrong can put you in an off-nominal environment, which is probably after takeoff and ascent, which means you're going to be in the water. So a
Yes.
lot of these suits have to be designed for water survival. Here's a case if you would check from a high altitude aircraft. That's fun. You drop our students in water, and you're seeing how the suit stabilizes, and testing different variations of systems that keep water out and allow you to survive and get stabilized in the water environment. And then To the right there, we have a full-scale mock-up of NASA's Orion spacecraft that we do similar studies from and teach orbital mechanics in. Um, and then here in Melbourne, Florida, we have the only commercial gravity offset lab. Here's our EVA spacesuit prototype. In the upper right, you can see it in microgravity. That's a still frame. And you can see the student actually using a VR. And we're testing like how in an actual simulated zero-G environment, in the VR environment, does that trigger different ways of motion sickness or space motion sickness.
Oh,
On the right, we're
interesting.
looking at different ways here of mobility. Here we have the machine sent to lunar gravity and we're pressurized here to about 1.5 psi. And in this case, looking at ski poles as a way to facilitate translation on the moon.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah, I would have never thought of that. That's quite clever, actually, like using to help counterbalance to help you move yourself around.
yeah, a lot of different things we can do with that. This is one of our tests. We let one of our students get hypoxic in a chamber and made sure they could activate the suit.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
the time I'm going to skip some of these videos. And in Connecticut, we have a neutral buoyancy lab. There's a mock-up of the airlock on the space station that we do different training in underwater and get people used to like how to mature procedures and tools with a lower fidelity analog suits.
So the
Um,
neutral buoyancy lab, that's meant to simulate like which kind of environment specifically is that?
Reduced gravity, or in that case, microgravity. There's three ways that we can simulate the space environment or the reduced gravity environment. One is the parabolic aircraft that we do
Mhm.
in Ottawa. It's an airplane that basically flies these big parabolas, and you get about 20 seconds of microgravity in each parabola, and you can repeat these. The other is mechanically, like with the gravity offset lab, and that's a system that allows you to translate, and you're hooked up to a harness, and there's a load cell, and it tells the computer to take away either all of your weight or a percentage of your weight, depending on the kind of gravity you want to simulate. And the third way is neutral buoyancy underwater, where you weight people out. So they all have different advantages and disadvantages, and you try to figure out what you're trying to study, the technology you want to mature, or the science you're trying to do, and the environment that's most appropriate.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
That's wow, that's fantastic. That is a lot of different projects that you have going on at like any given time, right? Testing all these different things in all these different ways.
yeah, we tell you, we're always growing. We're very member driven. A lot of these facilities just grow. These are a couple other pictures from the scientific ballooning and field geology, go through this. But we want to talk about inclusion and the time that we have. This is a typical course we have. This is not a stage photograph. This is just typically the way our classes form. You see here the incredible diversity that we get. This is really what we think the future of spaceflight is going to look like. And like I mentioned, we have three outreach programs. Possum 13 for give positive representation for girls and young women. And then Space for All Nations, especially people that come from emerging space countries. And we have a pilot project now in Guatemala. Like, how do we engage people in the space research and help build bridges both throughout Central America, but also in the US and Canada, and providing access to the facilities that we have. But we want to talk about Out Astronaut too. And we mentioned before, like, our community, and I say we, identify as a gay man, and our community is about 50% underrepresented in STEM by multiple studies. And how do we change this? Well, there has never been an openly LGBTQ person selected as an astronaut. There's been three. Sally Ride
Hmm.
was outed post-mortem, and then Wendy Lawrence came out long after she retired, and then Anne McLean was forced out publicly. Now,
Yeah.
this doesn't help. Like, how do we show professionals and inspire a community? And so we try to foster this sense of allyship within IES, so that people that come from marginalized or underrepresented backgrounds, that we all help them be seen as exemplary in the eyes of the communities from which they come. So that's the kind of intent of all of this is we have a lot of allies working behind the scene in all of these projects. But Out Astronaut is definitely one of our more impactful ones, and we think it's making a change and hopefully getting more people represented and engaged. Um, as a clip I'm going to skip through that, but here's a video when we introduced our gravity offset lab. We did an out astronaut event, and we put a pride flag on the quote moon, in the
Yeah.
simulated moon, in our suit. This is the first time we really introduced the suit and the flag and the laboratory. And it kind of helps us push our message. People are like, oh, why did they do this? And then they look, I'm like, okay, well, uh, that representation, the lack of representation has impact. So we're trying to do a number of things, recuperate lost talent to the workforce and address knowledge gaps in aeromedical knowledge, for example.
Yes, true.
Yeah, strengthen the STEM workforce. It's the diplomatic liability too. You look at like the Soviet Union, for example. They yeah, Valentina Tereshkova flew 15 years before Sally Ride flew, and the first black space traveler was from Cuba. So
Hmm.
they're well aware of that and use that in a very wise way. Now, I think Russia has a long way to go in LGBTQ issues, but still, these are things that need to be addressed sooner than later. Um, this is
I was
you
wondering
know,
if you could tell me more about the Out Astronaut contest, because I'd heard of it when Michael brought you up as a possible guest, but I wanted to know more about it and what that project is and what it's trying to achieve, and if it's still active and still going on.
Yes, every couple years, and we're trying to do this every year. We have a contest, and there's three phases intentional. The first, the real power of that is getting people to tell their stories publicly and visibly. That is inspiring enough, the diversity of people that have passion for STEM and that are out in the community. And and then we take a winner each time, and then we don't just want to fly some of the states. We're taking it on ourselves to try to fly out LGBTQ professionals. But just committing someone on a tourist flight, also, we don't think really helps the problem. We want to make sure that people are seen as peers in the industry and that they're truly professionals and they're doing things that are novel, publishable research. So the second phase of that is taking people that have won the phase one grant scholarship into a process where they can be seen like a thesis-driven process in astronautics. And then ultimately, we would like to fly one on a pure research mission. At the same time that we're doing this, it is an opportunity for us to, emphasize the need for an organization like Out Astronaut.
No, I do love pointing out the difference between, not committing these astronauts to a tourist flight and instead, highlighting the fact that they are also professionals and also part of the scientific community and the scientific process. And have just as much to give as as like an astronaut, say, who was chosen through more traditional means of like the military or moving up through the Navy and things like. I really admire and that aspect of it. I think it does drive home the idea of, like take us just as seriously as you would take anybody else.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
No, I really do admire. So, who are some of the astronauts? Are these you're showing us here the different candidates like Zachary Taylor, Phoebe Wall? These are all people who will hopefully fly or who have
They have
joined.
applied. This is an
Okay.
example of some that have applied. Our most recent winner was from Detroit, Isaac Anderson,
Hmm.
and yeah, and then before Brian Murphy from Florida is now doing his PhD out in uh, in Edinburgh,
Oh
Scotland.
wow, wow,
Mhm.
that is
And
very.
mhm.
It's just. I
And
was
then
just say it's very awesome. So you go ahead now.
Oh, I'm sorry. And then Shannon, she was our winner of the back in 2019. So we had 2019, 2021, and 2023. So we'll be
Okay.
gearing up for another one.
Another one. Yeah. Well, let us
Yeah,
know when applications open, definitely. Because maybe people over on this side. Is it open to Canadians? Or is it
absolutely. Now
excellent?
we've had
Yeah.
this throughout North America and the Caribbean. Um, the only country that regrettably we can't serve is Cuba, just because some of the technologies that we deal with are regulated.
Oh, okay. I see. But still, that's a quite a large reach. It's a very impressive project, I will say.
Well, we'd like to take it global. We'd like to really grow this. So we're always looking at people to get the message out and hopefully get more and more support for our work. So um, thank you for helping us get the platform to do that.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, I think this is a great project and definitely there needs to be more out people, I think. Not that it's easy to come out, necessarily or easy or not always safe to come out, but it's something that does need to change. And so that this project's very important to help facilitate at the very least that conversation of why don't we see out people in this field?
And it's amazing too, and being on having this kind of underrepresentation in STEM has huge impacts broadly. And like I've experienced through sport, seeing a transformation when you find representation. My sport for a long time has been rugby, and back in year 2000, I helped start it was the first gay rugby team called the San Francisco Fog with Mark Bingham. And the year later, Mark was one of the four that fought back on Flight 93 on September 11th. And so when we lost him, we had a tournament in his honor called the Bingham Cup. And at that time, there was only like, five or six teams in the world that were gay identified. And so we had a tournament, and the first one was in San Francisco. And then most recently, it's about 20 years later, you look at like in 15 years from that, like this had become the biggest international amateur rugby tournament in the world. And then like in the US, I think one study showed that rugby union was the most popular team sport in amongst gay men in the US. So like half a generation, 15 years, it's amazing when you think about what can change when you just have representation, when you just provide, when people feel a sense of agency and a sense of inclusion. And STEM and sport have a lot in common. They're very international and they're very based on their own merit. And there's a respect for the integrity of the process, the
Yes.
competition. Um, you know, and so seeing this play out in sport, in some ways, in my experience, I see, an astronaut as an attempt to help see this play out in STEM.
That makes sense. If the astronaut is like as you say when you first introduced the astronaut at the very beginning about how astronauts have like the meritocracy or the meritocratic, I think was the word you used, and how they elevate themselves to the status of, genuinely risking their lives for the sake of knowledge and for the greater good of what they're working towards. I do see that similarity and how it tracks. And
It's
it's,
everything
yeah.
we want in society, people in a healthy society to be,
Yeah.
have a, you know, have a sense of service greater than themselves and try to be the best version of themselves that they can be.
No, it's important, and I'm glad this project exists to recognize that and to push for it. Was there anything else you'd like to share in our final minutes before we say goodbye to having you here?
Well, I think here's some of our astronauts and in their process. But yeah,
Oh, I do
I think
recognize her
oh,
on the bottom right. Yes.
no, Sam Proctor. Yeah, no,
Yes.
she was on the Inspiration 4 mission
Yes.
and yeah, a number. But
Number of astronauts. Well, thank you so much for joining us and being here and taking the time to share your presentation and share all about the work that you do. I know I'll be looking more and keeping tabs on it a lot more than I was beforehand. I'm very happy it's been brought to my attention now. And congratulations for all the work that you do and everything that you're doing with your projects.
thank you, Marley, and best wishes to you and all of your great work getting
Yeah.
people excited about science and
Yes.
astronomy and maybe a little bit of other things closer to home.
Yes, yeah, we'll try to get the aeronomy like shoved in there. It just doesn't that word doesn't roll right off the tongue as easily as astronomy does, but we'll work it in. We'll work it in. I'll be sure of it now.
It seems like the farther away from home we look, the more we understand about our home.
That is
So
part of
yes,
it too. Yeah, it's like, oh, hold on, Earth's atmosphere is just weird. Like everyone else has something different going on, so we should probably
indeed.
understand this one. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else out there who's been watching, thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. We will be back in 2 weeks from now. I think Michael will return, and so we'll be back to our scheduled programming. But until then, take care and enjoy the rest of your days, everybody. And thank you again to Jason for joining us.
Thanks, Marley.